One of the most disturbing things about this is that he kept those girls locked away for over a decade in the way that he did. Yet, this jerk couldn't even go a month in captivity where everyone was treating him fairly, giving him food, treating with kind of humanity, and yet he couldn't handle it. Yet he did that to all those girls.
Yeah, well, just think how much stronger and better people they are.
Welcome to the Compendium, an assembly of truths hidden in plain sight.
Like when you're trying to find your keys and you know they're there, but you just can't find them.
Do you honestly think that we would base an entire story around losing your keys?
Well, you lose your keys a lot, so maybe.
Yeah, but it's not podcast worthy, you knobhead. How are you doing tonight, Adam?
I am good. I'm all good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not bad. What do you think of that clue? What do you think it could reasonably entail?
I have no idea.
Well, in today's episode of The Compendium, we're actually delving into the disturbing case of the Ariel Castro kidnappings. Have you heard of the story before?
No, I don't think I have.
Well, the year is 2002, when a seemingly ordinary man from Cleveland, Ohio, manages to abduct and imprison 3 young girls who kind of vaguely knew him. But after kidnapping them, he would hold them captive for over a decade until their incredible escape in 2013. Today, though, rather than focusing on what he did to these girls, I wanted to hone in on the girls themselves because to call this a monster story only glorifies Ariel Castro and what he did. But if we focus on the girls and who they were, then I think we can safely call this story a survival story, because to say that these women showed resilience is an understatement. They continue to survive even through their darkest moments of this ordeal. And their names were Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus. And in particular, I want to emphasize Michelle's story. She was the eldest of the 3 that were kidnapped and whose story I invested kind of the most time researching. And this isn't to say, of course, that Amanda and Gina's stories aren't equally as harrowing. They're all showed determination and a will to survive. But Adam, I want you to prepare yourself for an episode that not only explores the depths of human depravity, but also shines a light on the incredible capacity for human endurance and the pursuit for justice in the face of overwhelming darkness.
Wow, that's a big setup.
I'm so excited about the story because it's such an awfully sad story. But what makes it even more sad is the women that were involved, because they were just ordinary girls that had their whole lives ahead of them. They were pretty much teenagers or young adults when they were taken, and 10 years of their lives were just stolen. Horrible. So that's the setup for today. But before we dive into this week's episode, shall we do introductions?
Sure.
So for those of you tuning in for the very first time, I'm your host, Kyle Reese.
And I'm your co-host, Adam Cox.
You're listening to the Compendium Podcast, an assembly of fascinating and intriguing things. We are a weekly variety podcast where I, Kyle Reese, tell Adam Cox all about a topic that I think you'll find both fascinating and intriguing. From groundbreaking events to unforgettable people, we do this all in a simple 1-hour-ish episode, giving you just enough information to stand your ground at a social gathering. But before we get started, I hear something coming over the horizon. Do you hear that?
No.
What do you mean?
Oh, wait. Now I hear it.
It's because we add this in post, don't we?
Yep.
So, Adam, you got to love this one.
Okay.
This story comes out of North Dakota. So, this guy, Steve, and his girlfriend, Ina, they've been together for a decade, right? And out of the blue, Steve gets an email. And a distant relative has just died, and he's just inherited $30 million. So, Steve, not so subtly, starts to tell all his friends that he's planning on ditching his girlfriend for a newer model when he gets the cash.
Right.
And Ina senses that trouble is obviously afoot. And she starts telling people that she believes that Steve is planning on leaving her when he gets the money. So Steve is supposed to meet with the lawyers at the airport to sign for the inheritance. But suddenly he's sick and he starts feeling drunk without actually drinking anything at all. And then he starts vomiting everywhere and then losing consciousness. And his friends are like, damn, this is serious. But Steve brushes it off. He says that's probably heat stroke. Ina insists that she's taking care of him. It's all fine. But
What did she do?
exactly. Next thing you know, Steve's gotten much worse. They call 911 and he dies.
Oh my God.
So everyone's first thought is that Ina has poisoned him.
Yeah.
And they're right, because tests show that Steve had antifreeze in his system, which Ina had been giving him inside his sweet tea for days. So Ina is arrested. Her defense is that he must have smoked a cigarette that fell into the antifreeze. Right. Eventually, she confesses, and she says that she did it for the inheritance.
Okay.
And the cops are like, why do you think that you would get any of the money? It would all obviously go to his kids. And she's like, but we've been together 10 years, so I'm his common law wife. And they're like, that's a state-by-state thing. And in North Dakota, we don't recognize that. So she ends up killing him for absolutely nothing.
Really?
But wait, there's more. Turns out that the $30 million inheritance that Steve was left by some relative was actually sent by one of those Nigerian prince scammers.
No.
And yeah, there was no relative at all. And nobody questioned whether or not, like, who is this relative? Like, who are they? Where did they get the money from? Like, how did you not know that you had this rich relative? And ridiculous. It was because it was a random email that he received. And she goes and kills him for absolutely nothing.
What is wrong with these people?
I know. They're hillbillies. They're absolutely hillbillies.
But yeah, poor Steve. I feel sorry for Steve.
I know. Obviously, Steve's dead, yeah.
But to fall for those scam emails, like, how do you fall for that?
Some of them are so badly written. So, like, how? I have no idea how. I'd love to have seen that email.
And I can't believe that she was like, but I'm going to get his money, right? And
they're like, no.
Wow.
Yeah, so I just giggle so hard. That needs to be a movie. Do you know who would be perfect in that role?
Who?
Who's the guy from The Hangover?
What, Zach Galifianakis?
Galifianakis, or whatever his name is.
Yeah.
He'd be perfect in that film.
What, the guy that gets fooled by some email and then dies?
And he dies, yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, so that's all my latest news for this week. What have you got?
Well, this week it's more of a, you know, when you reach a certain age and then you find out, oh, I was this many years old when I found out about this.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, have you got a specific?
Yeah, so this week I didn't realize that Michelin star restaurants comes from Michelin tires.
Oh, there's a connection, is there?
Yeah, so
yeah, because, well, actually, his logo is on the front of the actual Michelin star guide.
Really?
Yeah.
See, I didn't even clock this. I did not put two and two together, and I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one out there.
Why? What did you find out?
So the reason the whole Michelin guide was put together was to encourage people to get out and about and go driving and obviously use the Michelin tires. So it was quite a good idea, and it was free initially. I think it came from France. So there'd be things to do in Paris and stuff like that. Then one of the Michelin brothers found out that the guide was being used to prop up a chair or, you know, open a door, and they were like, oh, this is a free guide to you and you're using it like this. So they then changed it to then start selling it for money. So it cost 7 francs when they started like printing it to be sold. And that's when they started introducing the whole Michelin restaurants, whereby they would send these mystery diners out to go review these restaurants. And then as a result, those that were really nice, they would then get a Michelin star and get featured in this guide.
Wow, the more you know.
So yeah, so when there is a connection there, but it was
a byproduct of wanting to sell more tires. Is that right?
Exactly that. It was to get people driving, create tourism, and the whole point is to search for these unforgettable experiences. So yeah, there we go.
Amazing. Well, there you go. Sounds like we're all caught up on all the latest things. So yeah, Ariel Castro. You've never heard of the story before?
Not the name, but then as soon as you started saying about the girls being held captive, it made me think of a few things. There's that film called Room, isn't there, with Brie Larson?
I don't think it's the same story, but this was a huge story in the States when this broke, because it happened under everyone's nose in just a regular, fair enough, it was a bit of a bad neighborhood, but still, it was on a residential street, which, was unfathomable. Like that, you've got this monster living, this ordinary guy living in your neighborhood who is just taking women off the street. Horrible. But like I said, today I want to focus on the girls mostly, and I want to paint a picture of who they were, because I think at the end of the day, remember, these women survived.
Sure.
So to kick us off, we're going to meet a young woman named Michelle Knight. Now, she was the first person to disappear, and she grew up poor. Now, early in life, she lived in a station wagon with her twin brothers, a cousin, and her parents. And they frequently moved from place to place across like the worst parts of the neighborhood. And because of the instability in her family, she was expected to care for her younger siblings. She said that she didn't really have the means to take like a shower every single day or even brush her teeth. So when she could, this was a big deal for her, especially for her and her siblings. She wanted to make sure that each time they got to brush their teeth, that it was a significant moment for them. So she cherished every opportunity that she got to do those types of things. From a young age, she was teased at school, mostly because of the way that she smelled. Her clothes were kind of never clean, and she rarely got the chance to shower. Most of her clothes that she did own were from charity shops, and they were typically like decades out of date. So you can imagine, like, no one's going to be getting rid of like the latest trends, are they, to a charity shop.
So I'm guessing she never was the most fashionable at school or anything like that.
No, and kids are horrible, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, doesn't give her really a great start, really. So over time, a male relative moves in with the family and he starts abusing her both physically and sexually, which caused Michelle to become really withdrawn within herself. She does, however, find solace in some things like drawing. Mostly she drew families enjoying their time together, and in particular, she had a real big love for wolves. So she also had a real passion for the horror genre, reading and watching Stephen King films and books. And when she was 15, she decided that she wanted the abuse to stop. And her living arrangements were kind of odd, though. She would sleep wherever she could at night, but this guy who was abusing her, he would pretty much just find her. She would try and sleep in the closet, and it just didn't work. So one night, she put 2 sleeping pills in his drink, which knocked him completely out. She grabbed some things in a backpack, and she slipped out of the bathroom window. Now, Michelle is completely homeless, and she starts living under an overpass where she sleeps in a rubbish bin.
Jeez.
So the only reason this works for her is because Michelle is tiny. She's just 4'7", so people nickname her Shorty. When she ran off, she took a baseball bat with her that she had in her yard, just to use that as a bit of protection. And to survive, she relied on having to steal food and get handouts from sympathetic people that would pass her by. Mm-hmm. Then one day, she's approached by an 18, 19-year-old guy under the overpass, and his name is Sniper. She's initially really nervous, so she's gripping her bat, and she doesn't know what his intentions are, but he says that he wants to help her out. He knows that she doesn't have any food and definitely has no money, and he offers her some help, but he needs her to be a drug runner for him. So even though this guy Sniper is getting Michelle involved into a load of dodgy activities, he's actually really kind to her. And when he takes her back to his house, he introduces her to another drug runner from Saudi Arabia, and his name is Roderick. And they hit it off almost immediately. They become super close friends, almost like brother and sister. So Michelle ends up living with him, and Sniper tells Michelle that she can sleep in his room while he sleeps on the couch downstairs. And now she has access to a shower, food, protection, and each week she receives just a little bit of money from him for her services as a drug runner. A lot of people kind of judge this arrangement, but for her, this is literally the best that she's ever had it, right? It's got her off the streets, and she essentially has a job. Not a great job.
Yeah, it's a job in a loose sense. I don't know if you could put that on a CV.
No, definitely not. She's terrible at running drugs. Sniper believes in her, and he helps her out. He's trying to teach her kind of how to gauge people, how to talk the talk, and also know when to kind of like leave a situation or when to step up with a little bat. Remember, she's tiny. She's 4'7", so I don't imagine she's going to be the best drug runner or the most aggressive person.
And I don't know if I'd trust a guy called Sniper, but I guess, you know, she hasn't got like many options right now.
Oh man, Sniper's such a street name though. Do you know? Like if you were like homeless or living on the streets, you'd be like, I need a name. I need a street name. I know, Sniper or Dragon.
A dragon. Better than Harold.
Yeah, Harold the drug runner. He also teaches her how to shoot a gun, and he gives her a Glock 22. And he says, like, when you're in a bad situation, always run. But if you can't, and if you're in fear of your life, that's when you use this gun. And at the same time, Roderick and Michelle's relationship as friends just blossoms. It's the first time that she's had a real close friend in her life. And they also have a lot in common. He's Arabic, and she says that she's part Arabic. And Roderick gives her like this hijab scarf that his mother had made for him. And he says like, you're my sister. Like, I will die for you.
Wow.
So, and that means the absolute world to her, because remember, she's not been someone who's had that many kind of great connection or kind of experiences with other people in her life.
Yes, he probably acts more like family than her actual family did.
Yeah, 100%. Like, she's had it bad. So one day, the cops raid Sniper's place, and Roderick and Michelle make it out, and they go to the only place that Michelle knows, which is the overpass. And she helps him find like a rubbish bin to sleep in. But obviously he's really massive. He's really tall, so he can barely fit in one. But so his one doesn't really have a lid. It's really kind of weird kind of picturing them sleeping in these bins. But I guess that's the thing that they do. This is where they hang out while they can kind of work out what the next step is. But within a matter of days, a neighbor where Michelle's family lives spots her down on the underpass. And she thinks, great, I've been found out. Sure enough, that woman calls her dad. And she says, I know where your daughter is. And within 20 minutes, he shows up and he's going to pretty much discipline her for running away. She, of course, doesn't want to go, but he forces her back to the house. And that evening, that male relative that had been abusing her shows back up and he whispers in her ear, you really thought that you could get away from me?
That's awful.
And the abuse just starts again.
Do we know, not that it matters, but do we know who the relative is?
No, for whatever reason. She's protecting him in her story, in her book. But, I mean, that's a prerogative, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just wondered if, you purposely left it out or actually the public doesn't know.
I'm sure it might be out there, but not in this account. Michelle eventually becomes pregnant, not by the guy who's abusing her. She starts dating a guy soon after she was forced back home. And by all accounts, he is really nice to her. But not long after she becomes pregnant, she finds out that he's been dating someone else. And when it comes down to him choosing her or the other woman, he chooses the other woman, and Michelle is just 17 years old. So on the 24th of October, Michelle gives birth to a little boy who she calls Joey. By this point, her mum and dad had split up, and her mum was seeing a new guy. He was an alcoholic named Carlos, and Michelle says that her life was a complete dumpster fire, and she was just desperate to build a better life for her and her son. Mm-hmm. So I guess she's like, I don't want my kid to go through all the crap that I went through and that my siblings went through. So she's just determined to kind of do better and give her son the best start. So one day when Michelle is out submitting job applications for some care jobs that she's applying for, she leaves Joey with her mother. And at some point, her mother leaves the house, leaving Joey with a very drunk Carlos. And Joey is upset that his grandmother is nowhere to be found. And ticked off that Joey won't settle, Carlos grabs Joey by the leg and he ends up fracturing the leg.
Shit.
He's fine. Okay. But Michelle takes him to the emergency room. And of course, everyone there wants to know what's happened to Joey's leg, right? Yeah. And how did he manage to sustain this kind of fracture? So Michelle lies and she says that he had an accident at the park. But meanwhile, Carlos calls the hospital and tells them that he was the one who hurt Joey and explains that it was an accident. So I can understand where he's coming from. Like, he's worried that the kid's going to get taken away, but it completely contradicts what Michelle has said. So the hospital knows that Michelle has lied, and they're concerned that the child might be like in a dangerous home. Right. So social services get involved, and Joey is taken away from her, and he's placed into foster care, which is awful. He's the only thing that she's got in this world that means something to her. It's the only thing that's motivating her to better her life.
Yeah, and I'm surprised they would have taken her away based on that. There must have been other things.
I'm sure they probably looked into it and they're like, this is not the ideal kind of living arrangements for their kid. And you got taken away. But the thing about the foster care system in the USA is that kids are often moved like many, many times within a matter of months. And it's not always local. And remember, Michelle, like, if Michelle wants to visit, she has to do this all on her own dime and on their terms as well, the foster family's terms. So in 2002, she's doing all that she can to prove that she's a good mother so that she can get Joey back. Mm-hmm. And so she has to attend all of her appointments, which are often towns apart. And of course, Michelle doesn't drive, right? She doesn't have a job even. Mm-hmm. So at this point, she's moved out the house and she's moved in with her cousin, Lisa, who's about 10 years older than her. And Lisa was like, don't worry, we're going to fix you up. You'll be fine. This is a good house. We'll get Joey back. No problem. So Lisa introduces Michelle to some new people, and she meets a woman named Ariel Castro, whose father was a bus driver called Ariel Castro.
Right, so he now meets the guy.
Yeah. So, dun, dun, dun! So one day, she's out with her cousin, and she's trying to find out where this appointment is. There's kind of like a mediation appointment where she can go and meet the foster parents and then also spend some time with Joey. And she thinks it's somewhere downtown, but she can't really find anybody who knows where the exact office is. So she's calling, but the office is like, tough luck, you need to get here. And at some point, she tells her cousin, like, listen, just you go home. I'm going to call the office one more time and see if I can figure out where this is.
Okay.
So she decides to go into a Family Dollar store to ask for directions. She thinks it's kind of in the area, so maybe they know where it is. But in line behind her is a guy called Ariel Castro. And he asks her if she can help him find his bank. And she's like, what's your bank? And he tells her. And she's like, oh, yeah, I know where that is. And he says, well, you were just asking about your place. Maybe I can help you out. And she says, okay. And they get into his car and she disappears.
Oh, no. So actually get into his private car, because you mentioned he was a bus driver.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he doesn't drive his own school bus around,
No.
right? That's at the school.
Well, that's what made me think, like, oh, actually, if he's going on a bus, then maybe it'd help. But she's got into his personal car.
Yeah. And she knows who he is, right?
True, okay.
So it's a father of a friend of hers that she's met. So she roughly knows him.
And so not a complete stranger. And so at least, therefore, some connection. Okay.
Exactly. And she's 21 years old. Now, Amanda Barry, she wants to be a fashion designer. And she's well known for keeping clothes organized, and she kind of arranges them by color. She keeps her shoes organized by heel height, and she has a bit of a flair for designing clothes, and she wants to make it in fashion. At the time, she's living with her mum, who was working really low-end jobs, trying to keep them afloat, and she's often struggling to pay the bills. And Amanda's dad, he left years earlier, but he wasn't really known for contributing to the family in any meaningful way anyway. And this really motivates Amanda to build a better life for herself and not to follow in her parents' footsteps. And so she decides that she's going to go to college. Her hope was to earn enough money and then down the road to help out her mum. Amanda was working at the local Burger King, which is situated on 110th and Lorraine Avenue, just 4 blocks away from where Michelle disappeared. So it's the day before her 17th birthday, and she's not in a good mood because she's just not getting along with her mother at this point. So her sister had told her over the phone how she and her husband had got into a massive fight. The reason why that's an issue is because her boss is her sister's husband. So she's got to go to work and he's the manager. So she's going to be getting it in the ear from him as well.
Right, with you.
So another guy that worked there says, hey, do you want to get out of work early today? And she was always, yeah, she's well up for it because it meant that she could go home and start getting ready for her birthday the next day. She gets out of work early. And she's figuring out how she's going to get a ride home. Her boyfriend was supposed to pick her up at the end of her shift. And so she wanted to be picked up early. So she's calling and she's texting. She just can't get through to him. This is 2003. So mobile phones are only just becoming mainstream at this point. So Amanda is heading home on foot and she sees a maroon van and what appears to be his daughter next to him. You know, like you see an older guy in a car and you see like a younger girl sitting next to him and you just assume that it's father and daughter.
Yeah.
She also thinks that she recognizes the girl that's in the car as well.
Okay.
So while she's texting on her phone, the maroon van pulls up next to her and the guy says, hey, do you need a ride? And even though she's not that far away from where she needs to be, she thinks, oh, that's really nice of him. And she had seen the young girl in the van. She thought she recognized her from school, a woman called Angela Castro.
Angela Castro.
Yeah, that's another daughter. This is his daughter. So when she gets in the van, she notices that the girl is no longer in the van. And she starts feeling a little anxious, like maybe she wouldn't have got into the van if she had known that the girl had gotten out.
Oh, okay.
So they're driving towards her home and the man compliments her on her phone and he's asking loads of questions about it. It's not really unusual since phones are kind of new and novel back then. Mm-hmm. But eventually he says, do you want to go and see my daughter? She's currently at home. I can drop you around. And she's like, sure, I could visit. She wasn't really getting along with her mum at the time. So she thought to herself like, yeah, I'll just go and socialize. Mm-hmm. So they head back to the guy's house. And as they pull up into his property, he parks up and he asks, do you mind if I just check your phone? Because they've been talking about it this whole time. And then Amanda hands him the phone and then he says, hold on, I just got to go move the dog. And he's got a chow chained up in the back garden. So now he has her phone and he's around the back of the house and she's conscious. So she walks around with him. And now he has control of the situation. And Amanda disappears.
Geez, that is sneaky and conniving. Mm-hmm. Wow. This man is not nice.
Not a nice guy, Adam. So it's about a year later. It's the 2nd of April, 2004. Gina DeJesus, I think is how you pronounce it.
DeJesus.
DeJesus or DeJesus. Just call it DeJesus. In fact, we'll just be calling it Gina from now on.
So, sounds like Gina of Jesus.
Yeah, maybe. So Gina's just 14 years old. And she's living with her parents, her brother, her sister, and her sister's 2 kids. And life for Gina is just completely ordinary. Her family get along really well. And by all accounts, she was happy and she lives in a really stable household. So Gina was really shy, especially around teenagers. And she would often kind of do that thing that kids normally do. Like they don't look adults in the eye. Mm-hmm. They're a little bit shy. Like it's not a big deal at all. But her mum thinks that she could be a little bit more confident. And her dad would always take her to school and drop her off early so that she could wait outside for the school to open with some other kids. And that might be a little bit of a way to socialize her as well.
Okay.
Now, the car that they were driving was a white Nissan. That's important because they bought this car through one of Gina's friends named Ariel Castro.
So this is another daughter.
Another daughter.
So there's 3 daughters so far.
Noticing a pattern here? So at school, Gina was placed in the class for slower learners, and she was often teased for obviously being picked up on that little smaller bus. In America, they call it the short bus, and it's that bus that picks up the more special needs kids.
Right, okay.
That private bus. So she was really bullied for it. And this is the reason why her dad bought this Nissan, so that he could be the one to drive her to school so she wouldn't need to catch that bus every day.
Right.
A really nice guy.
Yeah.
So on a positive note, Gina's grades are starting to pick up. And her teachers were even telling her that she may even be able to move into regular classes at some point. She's even told that she might even make it to college, which is a huge motivator. She's hugely inspired by this because for a lot of her kind of early years, she was told that she was slow, like she wouldn't make it to anything. Like she was in the slow class, so she also knew it as well, right? But to hear those words really motivated her. So she wanted to also be the very first person in her family to graduate from college as well.
Oh, cool.
So Gina, she's really into skating. So one afternoon, she's leaving school for the day, and her friend Ariel Castro suggests that they go roller skating. But Gina reminds her that she's grounded because her parents are caught her smoking a cigarette in her room. Have you ever smoked a cigarette in your room, like at home?
No.
No.
Why would you even? How do you think you could? Unless the
My
parents
sister
smoke.
always did it. Always.
But then your parents smoked, right?
That's true.
So that makes me think, okay, you can possibly get away with the smell of smoke being in the house, right?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, that was a silly thing for me to say, I guess. I guess so. So Arlene suggests that instead, maybe her parents will let her come over to her house and hang out for a while. Well, Arlene calls, and Gina can tell that it's not going to work out at all. So they cut their losses and they part ways, and Gina is going off home. So it's about a 40-minute walk. And while she's walking home, a Jeep Grand Cherokee pulls up, and it's Arlene's dad. And he asks if Gina has seen Arlene. And she's like, yeah, I was just with her, but she went that way. And he says, great, can you get in and help me find her? She's like, sure, yeah, why not? Like,
you wouldn't think anything of that, right?
Yeah, you're my mate's dad. So she gets in, and Gina disappears.
Right.
So
this was over the space of a couple of years?
Yeah, so like 2 years, a 2-year period, 3 girls go missing.
Right.
In the same neighborhood. So this is 105th and Lorraine Avenue. So we also have 106th, 110th, and 105 on the same street.
Right, okay.
So each of these girls have the same connection, and that is to this man's kids. So at this point, Michelle has been missing for about 15 months, and by all accounts, she was not missed by her family at all, which is just heartbreaking. It's awful. Around about this time as well, the department investigating her disappearance tried to call her family to find out if she'd returned home. And because they can't get through to anyone, they just take her off the register.
Really?
Isn't that awful? I know they're busy. I know they've got a lot on, but you just take someone off the register.
Surely you're still on a missing persons until otherwise.
You know.
Yeah.
It's disgusting. I felt so awful when I heard about this.
So she was the person or girl that didn't have many family connections or anything. So you think that she was picked on first because, that less people would miss her?
I don't think it was that calculated, if I'm honest. He knew who these girls were, and I think he just wanted someone. Right. But the other 2 girls, their families, they're constantly on the phone looking for any update on what might have happened to their daughters, right? They also fought to keep their daughter's disappearance in the media because, of course, as we know, that's like one of the most important things you can do, right? So we have 3 women. They all go missing within 5 blocks of each other within a 2-year period. Mm-hmm. So should we go through where these women have gone?
Yeah.
So Michelle, Amanda, and Gina, they were all taken to the same house on number 2207 Seymour Avenue. And this is just a 2-story house with a basement, 4 bedrooms, and 1 bathroom. The windows were all boarded up with cardboard or carpeting. And the front door of the house completely bolted shut. So it looks really derelict already.
So this is a separate house to his house with his family?
No, this is his house.
Even with his girls?
Well, they're separated.
Okay.
Yeah. The daughters live with their mother and
Okay.
their stepfather.
Okay.
So inside the house, completely dirty, completely trashed. There's food, there's rubbish littered all over the floors. And the person who lives at this house, of course, is Ariel Castro. So Ariel is someone who, as you can probably guess, didn't shower very often. He drank a lot. He smoked marijuana. He was really into music. He was a bass player with a salsa band. So he's been a school driver for about maybe 22 years, which kind of makes us a little more creepy to know that he was a bus driver. So he could have his eyes on.
Yeah, it's almost
bunch of
like
kids.
he's using those bus trips to work out who his next victim was going to be. I wondered if he did that. And the fact that he used his daughters and the friendships to get at these girls, that manipulative bastard.
I think it's a step above manipulation. It's just gross.
Yeah, but it's just that to me is, you said like he's not calculated, but he's using his daughters, their relationships to target these poor girls.
When I was reading this, there was a part of me that was like, is he using his kids to lure these women in? I did wonder whether or not they were involved in some way.
Well, that's what you made me think.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
That's how
obviously
I interpreted it.
Yeah, the way you said it suggests that maybe there's a connection there.
But there isn't.
Okay.
I think it was just being opportunistic
Okay, fine.
in that sense. So when he brings the girls back to the house, their initiation is to be led down to the basement and chained up to a support pole. They are not fed and they're often brutally beaten, and it's just a complete nightmare for these girls. So he would also wrap them up in these really heavy rusted chains, which he would wrap around their neck and around their stomach. And then he would also put like a motorcycle helmet over their head as a way to kind of muffle their screams.
That is awful. So they're in the basement, chained up, and I guess, did he soundproof this place?
That's why he used the helmet, right? He would sometimes put a sock in their mouth and then tape that shut and then put the helmet over their heads as well. So this is what would be considered their breaking in period. So what he's trying to do at this moment in time is trying to break them down mentally and destroy their mental state. And then eventually he can kind of assert his control over them. So as you know, Michelle Knight, she was obviously his first victim, and she was left down the basement for weeks and weeks. I think it was like a total of like 9 weeks. So when she is given food, it's usually like just an old sandwich from McDonald's. But Michelle has a mustard allergy. So it's probably the worst scenario for anyone who's kidnapped, especially when you have no control over what food you're going to be getting, right?
Sure, yeah. Can't really be picky.
No, you can't really be picky. But then also if you have a mustard allergy, like you know that you're just going to have this flare up, right?
Yeah.
He also doesn't unchain Michelle to use the bathroom that often. Instead, he just gives her like a bucket, which he would only like empty like once a week if he remembered. And often it would just be too late. So meanwhile, Michelle's not getting a clean change of clothes either. So she's just getting dingier and dingier. In between the abuse and her having trouble going to the bathroom, she's just getting dirtier and dirtier. And it's just completely dehumanizing to these girls as well.
Sounds horrific. I can't imagine. That's 9 weeks that she was left alone. And the fact that you've already alluded, it goes on way longer than 9 weeks. I can't even imagine how they coped with this.
There comes a point where you just don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. And these girls, they consider committing suicide. But luckily they continue to live in hope. And we'll talk through like what drove them to keep fighting forward, because it's quite a sad story. We're just setting the scene at the minute, giving you an indication of who these girls were and what they went through, because I think it's important to know who they were as people. And of course, she's living in filth, which is probably not something that she's very used to, but like he's living in filth anyway. Like he's pretty much a hoarder. He's living in this disgusting house where there's just shit everywhere. And also, he has this wash machine in the basement that he keeps cash in.
That's where he keeps his money.
Well, he's on unemployment benefit, right? And he's worried that those benefits might be cut if they knew how much he was earning. So he just pops it into this washer downstairs in the basement.
You could have kept that in a box and then still use the washer machine.
Exactly. That's probably why he's so dirty. He's using his wash machine as a bank, I guess.
Stupid.
Also, throughout the house, many of the doors are just padlocked shut, which he justifies that he doesn't want someone breaking in and stealing his money. He would avoid any visitors as best he could, saying that kind of the place was a mess, or that his dogs were vicious, or like there was nothing in the house to eat. And remember, he's got a family as well. So they wouldn't come over. And if they did come over, he would kind of play the radio or the TV really, really loud to mask any of the noises. And visitors were only able to access through the back door, which he would meet you on the front porch and then escort you around. And people were only allowed in the kitchen. So people that did visit, they were only there for like 10 to 20 minutes maximum.
That must have been really weird. Everyone's like, they go around his and they're like, we never go and sit down in his lounge.
Yeah, especially maybe if they were used to doing that, especially as kids, right? Then all of a sudden, for like the last 10 years, they're not allowed anywhere else other than the kitchen. If they even visited at all, I'm not even sure how often they did.
And I still would have thought you would have heard someone, but I'm guessing he's put a sock in the mouth that really must muffle the sound.
Possibly. Remember, there's 3 people in this house, right? So the only rooms that were open were like the kitchen, the bedroom, and the bathroom. Everything else was locked. And he claimed that he just needed the locks because it was a rough neighborhood. And people bought it. People thought it was okay. What's really gross is that when he first kidnapped each of the girls, he would lie to them and tell them that he only needed them for like a couple months and that they would be home by Christmas or they'll be home by the summer, or he'll let them go when he got another girl in. Can you imagine hearing that as well? Like knowing that, great, I've got some hope, but it means that I'm then passing the baton over to another person.
Someone's going to come take my place, yeah.
Yeah, and they're going to go through the abuse and the rape and everything that they're going through.
And even though the thought of going, oh, it's okay, I can just put up with this for 2 months.
Yeah, it's horrible, isn't it?
So they were physically attacked, sexually attacked.
Everything. They were abused, they were beaten, they were punched, they were raped. Horrible. For 10 years.
10? Oh my God.
A decade. It's crazy. So about a year after Michelle is kidnapped, she hears him bring home another girl. And she's kind of happy because 2 things. It's going to be someone else around. But it's also sad because she knows that someone else is going to be going through the exact same hell and the torture that she's been going through. So Michelle is super well informed as well because Ariel has given her access to a TV. So she can see on the news that Amanda Barry has gone missing. She knows who this person is. She also knows that Ariel told her how he has a thing for blondes and Amanda Barry is a blonde. So she puts 2 and 2 together.
Right.
Ariel is such a monster. The thing is, though, he was also unpredictable, especially towards Michelle. One minute he would kind of act like he wanted to hang out with you and talk to you, like talk about normal things. And then the next thing, he was just there to hurt you. So the police are searching for at least Gina and Amanda. Remember, they took Michelle off the missing kind of persons list. All they have is just one lead, which they get just days after Amanda's abduction. Basically, it's a phone call from her cell phone. And there is one call where it's just a hang up, and then another one where the man says, I'll bring her back in a few days. She's with me. And that's it. So the FBI tried to do something with this. And because they know which cell phone tower the call pinged from, they have a rough idea where the call was made. So they get an undercover van and they stake out in a car park close to where Michelle was last seen. And their equipment is monitoring for another call to come in. But sadly, no more calls come in. And the thing is, though, 8 days go by. She didn't have her phone charger with her. They weren't common at that time. So it's not like she could get another phone charger. That phone's probably dead.
Yeah.
And so after 8 days, the FBI give up and they pull out. What they didn't know is that the house where they were being kept was less than 1,000 feet away. So if they literally look across the street, there it is.
That's weird, isn't it?
There's something ominous and scary and creepy about that.
Yeah, right under your nose, all that was happening.
Yeah. So Gina's father was actually friends with Castro's neighbor, and he would actually go over there occasionally, and they would see Ariel, and they would have beers together, chatting out in the garden. And Gina's father would talk about his missing daughter. All the while, she's like a few feet away, stuck in the basement somewhere.
To this guy, telling him.
Not knowing that her daughter, or she probably not knowing that her dad is just standing right outside.
Yeah.
Isn't that awful? That just makes it even worse.
For years as well.
Yeah, that's disgusting. So during the time when searches and vigils were taking place, this guy would show up and he would help out. He was donating money. He was even leading the prayer vigils that were taking place. And that motherfucker was Ariel Castro, and people just thought that he was a nice guy around the neighborhood. There were suspects along the way. The first one was a guy called DJ, who was Amanda's boyfriend. And when he was asked, what do you think happened to Amanda? He said that he just didn't care what happened to her. And
harsh.
Yeah, that is really harsh. And the only way they knew this was because they got one of his friends to kind of wear a wire and then ask him a bunch of questions. So the police search his car and they do find some evidence of blood in the trunk, but it turns out that it's just chicken blood, which they think that he picked up from the grocery store or something like that. There was also another man who would frequent the Burger King where Amanda worked. He seemed to have an interest in her and they checked him out, but yeah, none of that stuff went anywhere. The only they had was that one phone call and that was it. And there was nothing they could do after 8 days because mobile phones weren't that mainstream. Do you think maybe that's why they standardized charges?
There's probably a number of reasons. I don't know, a commercial element so you can use them everywhere and stuff. But but maybe they're not as sophisticated, with Find My Phone and everything else. Because even now, isn't there a small amount of charge even when your phone switches off to be able to do that?
I know with my iPhone there is. In fact, they make it difficult to turn the bloody thing off.
So yeah, the thought there's only one lead. Usually there's a couple, but the fact that there was only one.
Yeah.
It's really unlucky.
Really unlucky. So as we know, all 3 of the girls were raped and Castro, of course, didn't wear any protection. So they would often fall pregnant. And in Michelle's case, this happens 5 times.
What?
And every time he would beat and punch her in the stomach, hit with a dumbbell, push her down the stairs, anything that he could do to cause a miscarriage. But eventually, Amanda ends up getting pregnant and Castro says that he wants to keep this baby. And in Amanda, he believes, this is disgusting, he believes that he's found his wife.
God, that's ridiculous.
And he tells her as much as well. So he treats her kind of a little bit differently to the other girls, but he's still a brutal monster, don't get me wrong. Any kind of a bit of kindness is nothing compared to what he's physically doing. But he honestly thinks that he can just take the baby around to his relative's house and just show it off. And he does. And he tells them that it's his girlfriend's baby. And Amanda does not want to have this baby at all for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But she is forced to give birth to the baby in a kid's plastic pool in the basement. And Michelle is brought downstairs to help with the childbirth. But when the baby is born, it's not able to breathe at all. So Amanda has to do mouth-to-mouth on the baby. And Castro threatens her that if the baby dies, she will die. So Michelle manages to save the baby.
Wow, that is incredible. These are young girls, right?
Yeah.
And they know how to deliver and resuscitate a child, a baby?
Yeah, it's all Michelle. She's slightly older than everyone else, but she knows how to take care of people. I think she's got a wisdom in her. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well,
more than the other girls.
She had a son.
Yeah, of course, she had a son, so she knows these things as well. But
even still,
it's incredible.
Usually if you're going to hospital and you're giving birth, I don't think you're paying attention of what you need to do, of all the things that go on to look after a baby, right?
Yeah, exactly. And she does it. She gives it mouth to mouth and the baby is born and they call her Jocelyn. So as the years go on, there's now this little kid that's running around this house and Castro is being a little bit more lenient with the chains, especially with Amanda. After all, she's obviously Jocelyn's mother and she needs to take care of the kid. So he's eased up on the chains, but he threatens the girls constantly that he will shoot them if they try anything. So if they try to leave or anything, it works because years go by and there's never, ever been a single attempt to break out.
Are they all living in the same room or do they have separate rooms?
He keeps them separate.
He does keep them separate?
Yeah, largely. He keeps them separate. He doesn't like them hanging out together, especially hanging out with Michelle. I wonder why as well. I reckon she's just a firecracker, right? She
could start a riot.
I reckon so.
Yeah.
I reckon so. She's tiny, but she's a force. So I think she was maybe a little bit harder to crack, possibly because of, I don't know, her past. I don't know. He would set up these tests where he'll leave one of their doors unlocked and then he'll act like he's left the house. And then if they come out, he'll be standing there waiting. And then if they do come out, he'll beat the absolute shit out of them as punishment. And the girls really band together. If one of them has been punished, the other two will save the other one food. So they are a team, even though they're separated to a degree. He tries his best to keep them unconnected. Now, Jocelyn, she's running around the house a lot more and it's getting more and more difficult to keep her concealed. One of the neighbors actually sees her walking around the backyard and he asks, who is that? I saw this little tiny toddler just walking around your back garden. And he's like, yeah, it's my granddaughter. And he'll show a photograph of Jocelyn to his daughters and he'll say, look, this is my girlfriend's daughter. But because of the strong family resemblance, the kids are like, are you sure that's not your kid? Because it looks just like him. It like a mini walking, talking little Castro. She's adorable by all accounts.
Yeah. Did he really have a girlfriend?
No.
So that's really funny that he's going to his kids and going, my girlfriend.
Yeah.
That is so messed up.
It's really messed up, isn't it? I don't know how he figured he would get away with this.
Is he mentally okay? I mean, he's not, but as in, is there something, was he diagnosed with anything?
No, I don't think so.
So he is just a dick.
I think he's just an absolute monster.
Wow.
But this is not a monster story.
No, survival.
It's a survival story. So like I said earlier on, throughout this entire turmoil, the girls are kept in separate rooms and they very rarely are let out of their respective rooms. And Michelle, he doesn't really want her out at all, really. Like, he might let her out if it's like Jocelyn's birthday, and then he might let her come downstairs at the end of the party to maybe spend the last few minutes with them. But other than that, she's always chained up in her room. And he's really cruel towards her. He often tells her that she's ugly and that no one would want her. And he even tells her that none of her family try to even look for her after she disappeared, which I think is just awful. It is so cruel. This is another example of how cruel it was. In the early days after Amanda was taken, he would let her listen to some of the voice messages that were left on her mobile phone. But at the point when her mother was just about to speak, he would then just end the call. It's just vile. It's just another way for him to torture them.
That is, I hope he's rotting, or if not dead.
So even though he allows them to watch TV and listen to the radio, he has one house rule. And that is no one is allowed to watch anything starring black people or listen to any music by any black artists on the radio.
So to add to all this, he's racist.
He's a big fat racist as well.
Oh, God.
And if they did,
God.
particularly with Michelle, he would come in and just beat the shit out of her. So he was just a racist piece of shit. And the girls really suffered psychologically as well. They just couldn't work out like why this was happening to them and like why God hadn't stopped this, or why even the police hadn't even broken down the door yet. Because they knew that the families were still looking for them. But the fact that they hadn't found them yet, because you grow up your whole life believing that justice will always prevail, right? But they've been in this situation for 10 years and it's still going on and there's no sign that it's stopping.
I guess if there's no signs or evidence to suggest that it's him, he's done such a good job in covering his tracks and doing what he's done. And probably there was less surveillance around then at the time, less tech. So maybe it was easier to do that.
Same time, we're talking like 2003, 2004. This is what, like 2007, 8, 9 by now?
True. Yeah, good point, actually. By this point, you'd think it would have stepped up a gear.
It's crazy. It just goes to show there's some parts of this world that even in developed countries where there aren't eyes on everything.
Yeah.
They also like really questioned like whether or not they would make it just another month. They were literally living month to month. And there were times where Michelle would go without food for 2 weeks at a time, especially when she was pregnant, because that was just one of the ways that he would ensure that she had a miscarriage by just not feeding her. At one point, every single one of them considered taking their lives. In the first 6 months, they just could not imagine surviving in that environment any longer. But they managed to endure for over a decade in captivity, which is just incredible. And I think this is less, like I said, this is less of a story about a monster and more of a story about survival and the persistence of the human will to live.
So I guess for Amanda, she's got a child, right? And I'm guessing at this point she has connected or bonded with that child, maybe not initially, but now has. So she has something to fight for, right? Wanting to get out, maybe. I'm not saying that none of them did, but she wants to have a future for her child. What was driving the others?
Well, it's exactly the same thing. It's Jocelyn. So it's ultimately Jocelyn was the thing that reinvigorated the girls into continuing to survive, essentially. Wow. So there's so many heartbreaking stories as well that they go through. Obviously, I'm not going to go through some of the most graphic ones because there's just no point. We know that they've obviously gone through hell. But some of the stories that they've told as well, they've all relayed through the books that a lot of them wrote. And the girls were allowed, while they're in captivity, to keep a diary for a while. Ariel brought home some journals that they could write in, and he said you can write in whatever you like, just as long as you don't name any names, essentially. He even told Amanda at one point that she could write a letter home to her family, but just before it got sent, she broke a house rule, and he just handed the letter back, and he said it's not going anywhere now. So she had that one chance to kind of write home.
I wonder if he would have gone through it, though. I don't know.
Do you reckon?
He doesn't seem like the guy that's that.
No.
That would do that.
That's possible. And also, like, when those journals that they were keeping, like when they ran out of pages, they started writing on napkins from the fast food restaurants that they were given. And for a while, Amanda would keep a record of every single time that she was attacked using an X within her book. because she was adamant that she was going to survive and she wanted him to be punished for every single act that he committed against her. But eventually she just stopped keeping accounts because looking back over all the exes just started to hurt and she just couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah.
And that's heartbreaking.
When your page is like filled with exes, I imagine.
Yeah.
It must be like, do you know what? This is probably enough.
Yeah.
I don't need to count anymore.
Horrible. And like I said, ultimately it was Jocelyn. That was the thing that reinvigorated the girls into surviving. And it's this little toddler that gave them that sense of hope. Because there's just this innocent kid just running around and she's so happy to see everyone. Do you know what I mean? And she really did have the run of the house because he wasn't exactly going to chain her up at all. She would literally say to him, like, listen, mister, you need to start unlocking some of these doors around here because I can't get to where I need to be. So Jocelyn was the key to essentially ending all of this because he starts unlocking some of the doors a bit more and giving them a bit more leniency and
a bit lax, I guess, with it.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. Jocelyn is asking for these doors to be unlocked, and whether or not he decided he would do this for the child or whether or not he just assumed that he had total control over the situation because it's been like, 10 years at this point and none of them have tried to escape.
And how old's Jocelyn at this point?
So she's around about 6 now.
6, okay. So she should be in school, but not.
Yeah, she should be in school. She does go to school.
Does she?
Yeah, I'll talk to you about that in just a second. Yeah, because they've been held captive for 10 years now. So he thinks that if they're going to try to escape, they probably would have done it by now. So a while later, he tells Jocelyn that he's going to his mum's house and he mistakenly leaves Amanda's door unlocked. And she figures this out pretty quickly. And she asks Jocelyn, like, where is he? And she says he's gone to mum's house. Now, with this information, she knows that he's not just hiding around the corner or downstairs, waiting for her to come out of the room and do a little test. So from experience of him visiting his mom in the past, she knows that he's probably going to be gone quite a long time. So this is May the 6th, 2013. It's about 6 p.m. And Amanda makes her way downstairs and she sees a neighbor on the other side of the street. And she starts screaming out through the mail slot on the door. And one of them, Charles Ramsey, notices the screaming. And along with his friend Miguel, they hurry over to the front door. On the bottom half of the door is like a piece of flimsy sheet metal, and it's fitted more to keep people in rather than keep people out, which means that you can easily kick through this piece of sheet metal, and he's able to bust kind of the bottom half of the door, and Amanda crawls out and she just hugs him, and Charles says, I knew something was wrong when a pretty white girl ran into a black man's arms. And she was able to get to a neighbor's house with the help of Charles and Miguel, and they called 911. And when the police show up, Amanda tells them about the other 2 girls that are in the house, and she is terrified that Castro is just going to come back at any moment. And Michelle and Gina, they are beside themselves. They have no idea what's going on. Remember, they're locked up in their bedrooms upstairs or down in the basement, and all they hear is banging on the front door, and they think it's literally a home invasion or something. And they just lay low thinking that they're going to be shot or killed at any point because he's always threatened that it could happen. So it's not until the 2 police officers show up in the room that the girls are in that they realize that they're safe and they've finally been rescued. And Michelle is in a tragic state, Adam. They immediately work to get her to hospital because she's that badly battered. And she's also severely underweight and she's got a serious bacterial infection as well. So it's so bad that they put her in hospice care because they think that she's only got a few days to live.
Really?
Can you imagine surviving 10 years held captive in that hell only for them to say, we think you're going to die in the next few days?
Oh my God. That would be, what would you be going through your mind at that point where you're like, I've done everything else to survive?
It's crazy. She's not going to die though, because she is a 100% survivor. She has survived the other 10 years and she's not done that for nothing. She's not going to die. So you can calm down. So Michelle remembers like what she was doing just before she got abducted. And that was that she was fighting for her son, right? So that's what gave her strength to just keep going on and getting out of the hospice. When she did get better, she did hope that she could connect with her son. But social services told her that like he's been with the foster family for so long now that they consider him their son. And they don't advise you get involved.
That's horrible.
It's horrible, isn't it? So they advise her to not visit because, it would be something that he wouldn't be prepared for. The only thing that she asked for, though, are just some pictures of him throughout the years. I feel awful for Michelle. So awful. Her life, her backstory, and also everything that she went through, she was treated the worst.
How long was she in the hospice for?
So I think like 3 or 4 weeks.
3 or 4 weeks, okay. And the fact that her, I guess all her vitals and signs and everything like that were just not good.
No.
Bless
Horrible.
her.
Michelle said that while she survived being held captive for all these years, learning how to survive moving forward was the next hurdle. And they kept hearing over and over that, like, you're rescued, like, the nightmare is over. But to them, a whole new nightmare was now beginning because they had lost 10 years of their life. Because, like, when you're abducted, remember, like, time stops for you completely. You stop learning, you stop growing psychologically, and they're now in their 20s, but they haven't progressed past their teens or their early 20s in Michelle's case. Like, they just haven't lived at all. So for them, they're still these teenagers in, like, these older, more battered bodies, essentially.
Yeah.
Raped and abused. It's disgusting. Feels so bad for these kids. And for Michelle, she isn't exactly walking out of 2207 Seymour to a loving family, right? She has to build everything from nothing again.
All herself.
All of herself. Michelle talks about how she watched an interview that her mother had given, sharing these happy kind of memories. And Michelle's response was like, who is she talking about? Because it's not me. Like, I didn't do any of those things. And I mean, that's really tragic. So she's starting from nothing and she doesn't want anything to do with the family because she's already gone through hell. She's probably thinking to herself, I've gone through all this shit. This is it. I'm not going back to an abusive family.
Yeah.
That is it now. And I don't blame her. You got to cut out the toxicity, right? All the girls share the same sentiment that the thing that ultimately carried them through the final 6 years of captivity was that little girl, Jocelyn. And they wanted to make sure that she had a normal childhood as they possibly could make it. And so Amanda would request that Ariel bring stuff back home for her, like colouring books, pens and pencils. And when Jocelyn was around kind of school age, Amanda would say, okay, it's time to go to school. And they would walk around the living room pretending to walk to school before then going to the area that they had set up where they would teach her, which I think is just so incredible that the small kid that was born under such tragic circumstances was the thing that gave them all that purpose to survive. Because in this situation, when you think about it, surviving is a lot to ask of someone, right? And somehow they did it. They found that strength to do it. And it was because of that girl. Because without her, they probably would have just committed suicide, right?
Yeah.
Because they all talked about how they considered it. So, do you want to find out what happened to Castro?
I mean, I feel like we have to. Not that I care in any way, shape or form, other than I hope that he got what he deserved.
So, police track him down pretty quickly. And he was with his brother and they'd pulled into a McDonald's. And there was a cop on either side of the car demanding Castro's ID. And the cop pulls out a gun and says, you guys got to get out of the car. So Castro had another brother who was asleep at home at his place when the house was raided. And they take all three of them to jail. So none of them are told why they've been arrested. Finally, word got back to the three that they'd been arrested for kidnapping. And Castro's brothers were like, what the fuck? One of his brothers thought that he'd been arrested for like an unpaid parking ticket.
Right.
The other brother kind of had an idea that maybe it was Castro just based on the way that he was acting because he was just really quiet. And then Castro turns around to him and says, yeah, you're never going to see me again.
Really?
So he was like, okay, you've done something bad. Before the kidnapping, Castro was having a lot of issues with his then wife, Grimelda, who had gone through years and years of abuse under his hand. He would often lock her in the house. He would force her to wear clothes that covered up her entire body. And she was never allowed to go anywhere or talk to anyone at all. But after years of beating her up, her family decided that they were going to step in because it wasn't like Grimelda was going to do it herself, right? She wasn't going to take action against him on her own accord. So one day, her father and her brother shows up and they just beat the heck out of him. Right?
Really?
And when he gets up, he's like smiling smugly and is like, yeah, let's see what happens. Yeah. And you can just get that sense of like what kind of a monster it is, right?
Yeah.
He just doesn't care. So then one day at the hospital, Grimelda meets a security guard named Fernando Colon. Colon?
Colon.
Yeah, Colon.
Mr. Colon.
Mr. Colon.
Interesting.
And he convinces her like just to leave. And so she does. She takes the kids, except for Angela, the eldest. And Grimelda ends up having a kid with Fernando. And at some point, they get married. But this really pisses Castro off. And he starts accusing Fernando of sexually abusing his daughters, which just starts this whole massive legal mess. It gets sorted out in the end, and he's fine. But he stands his ground, and he sticks with Grimelda. So he's just a complete and utter piece of shit. So Castro is charged. He goes to court, and he's found guilty. Although throughout most of the trial, he maintains that he was innocent. And in his mind...
How?
Exactly. In his mind, he believes that he wasn't as bad as the girls were saying that he was. And he genuinely tried to argue that there was harmony in the house.
Oh, shut up.
What?
Hey, don't you dare try and say that you're misunderstood. You absolute... I'm not going to say the word.
That's his defense. So he tries to play the sympathy card by saying that he was sexually molested by another boy growing up and that his mother was really mean to him.
Oh, boo-hoo. I'm not obviously saying the molestation.
No.
Terrible. But, dependent on that for what he did.
Yeah, exactly.
Not gay.
Come on. Does your mum being mean to you kind of hold up against Michelle's life?
Yeah.
After everything she's been through? He also puts a lot of blame on the girls themselves. So during his interrogation video, which you guys must watch, he actually says, there were security cameras around. Why did you not catch me? And he was like, why did they get into the car? Why? It's their fault. What were they wearing at the time? They were asking for it.
They're asking to be kidnapped for 10 years.
I swear to God.
By wearing a slightly shorter skirt than...
I don't think that was the case.
Do you know what I mean? That's what I'm trying to say. Is he trying to make out that they were being...
That's exactly what he was trying to say.
Too sexual.
Yeah, that's exactly what he was trying to say. So the charges issued by a grand jury against Castro are 977 counts. That's 512 counts for kidnapping, 446 counts for rape, 7 counts for gross sexual imposition, 6 counts for assault, 3 counts for child endangerment, 2 counts for aggravated murder, in which Castro is accused of intentionally causing a termination of a pregnancy, and 1 count of possessing criminal tools.
What about so you said 500 counts of kidnap?
Yeah, I don't know why. Like every day that they're held or every month that they're held, I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting how
that's broken down.
Yeah.
Maybe there are all the instances where they try to leave and I don't know.
Yeah.
How do you go through all the instances over a 10-year period?
Yeah, or do you say like one cap in usually lasts on average 90 days? So just,
maybe,
I don't know.
Maybe they calculated in some way.
Yeah, that's weird.
But on the 1st of August 2013, he's sentenced and given life plus 1,000 years.
Good.
Because of the miscarriages that he caused. I mean, they did consider the death penalty, and I don't advocate for the death penalty at all. But, I mean, hey, you caused like 6 miscarriages.
I mean, I'm not for him.
1,000 years is enough. For me, 1,000 years is enough.
Yeah, I guess so, but yeah.
But Ariel doesn't actually serve much of his sentence at all because a month into his sentence, he hangs himself in his cell. And the guards are supposed to be watching and checking on him every 30 minutes. One of the most disturbing things about this is that he kept those girls locked away for over a decade in the way that he did. Yet, this jerk couldn't even go a month in captivity where everyone was treating him fairly, giving him food, treating him with kind of humanity, and yet he couldn't handle it. Yet he did that to all those girls.
Yeah, well, just think how much stronger and better people they are.
Exactly. In Michelle's book, she says the thing that made all of this easier for her to handle was that it was important for her that she outlived him. And she did. She outlasted him, right? She was stronger than him. In fact, in the book, she talks about how she only ever referred to him as dude. But she said that after it was all finally over, the rescue, the court case, the sentencing, and his death, she realized that I can use his name now. What's he going to do? Is he going to come and get me? No.
Yeah.
So she can finally use his name, and she calls him Ariel Castro because he's got no power over her.
Yeah.
And during the trial, the girls gave victim impact statements to tell him face to face, like how he had impacted them. And Amanda and Gina chose not to speak. Instead, they kind of like their relatives spoke on their behalf. They read out a letter. But Michelle was like, I need to speak because it was important to her that it wasn't merely enough to survive and make it out of there, only to have this monster trying to distort things in front of this jury and make out that he was a victim. Yeah. She wanted to look him in the face and set the record straight. This girl, for a 4'7" tiny girl, is just a force to be reckoned with. Mm-hmm. She is so... I don't know what the word is. Like
formidable?
She's a formidable girl. Yeah. So remember the day that Amanda went missing? Mm-hmm. So the reason she went over to Castro's house was because she wasn't talking to her mum, remember? So the last conversation that she had with her mother didn't end on a good note.
Yeah.
And her mother ended up dying in 2006 while Amanda was still in captivity. And so not only did Castro rob her of so much already, but he also took away her last moments with her mother.
I don't even know what to say to that.
Yeah. So like I said, each of the girls has written their own books. Check them out, support these girls. Michelle changed her name. She's now Lily Rose Lee, and her book is called Finding Me, A Decade of Darkness, A Life Reclaimed. Amanda and Gina DeJesus, they wrote a book, Hope, a memoir of survival in Cleveland. And since then, Gina's gone on to help with law enforcement with recovering missing children and is part of supporting children when they're finally found and getting them rehabilitated.
That's really nice.
And something that really resonated with me was that Michelle said, when asked, like, how did you get through it? And how are you not broken? And her response was that if you already went through torture in your life, you can't be broken twice. You can only survive.
Oh.
And that is the story of the survival of Michelle Knight, Amanda Barry, and Gina DeJesus.
I can't believe that. I can't believe this even happened.
It was awful for 10 years.
And how come Michelle changed her name? I don't. Is it a fresh start? Does she want to be referred to as Michelle, or?
I don't know. I just get the inkling that it makes sense that she changed her name. And you know what? It's an awesome name. Lily Rose Lee.
That's nice.
Yeah, so I guess it's just a fresh start, right? It symbolizes a rebirth almost. She can be whoever she wants. And I think she's in her 30s now. She looks great. They're all healthy. They've got their own lives. It must be awkward for Amanda, I guess, having Jocelyn. Because, of course, that's a daughter, right?
Yeah, and the father, who's my dad?
Yeah, and I'm sure she has come to peace with it and she sees it differently. But for someone who's very fresh to it, I would look at that and go, that's strange. But also at the same time, she's just a little girl, right? She's innocent. And she was the thing that saved them all.
Yeah, and I mean, I think if that was you, I'm trying to imagine if you learn out that was your father and stuff. Because you couldn't hide that from her, because if you just look up your name, people Google their name, don't they? And they would find all this news information. But I guess knowing that actually you helped your mum survive and these other two women, maybe you'd have, I don't know, come to some sort of understanding or peace with that. Yeah. Wow. That was incredible survival story.
Shall we do the outro?
Yeah.
So we come to the end of another episode of the Compendium, an assembly of fascinating and intriguing things. If you found today's episode both fascinating and intriguing, then subscribe and leave us a review. Don't just stop there though. Schedule your episodes to download automatically as soon as they become available. We're on Instagram at The Compendium Podcast, so stop by and say hi, or visit us at our home on the web at thecompendiumpodcast.com. We release every Tuesday, and until then, remember, not all monsters live under the bed. Sometimes they live at Seymour Avenue. See you later.
See ya.